It's been in the back of my mind for quite a while, the whole climate change debate, environmental issues growing, pollution. So I've always felt very strongly about it, and I've been watching very carefully what others have been doing.
My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really.
It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Calm skies, muddy boots, and the casual laughter of families gathered for a local horse show in the English countryside. Nothing about the day suggested it would spark headlines or ignite a ripple effect across the royal family. There were no red carpets, no palace guards, no stiff protocol. Just children squealing with delight at ponies trotting through rings, paper cups of tea passed around, and spectators in worn jackets enjoying the fresh air. Among them, blending almost seamlessly into the crowd, were the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge with their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, hoping to spend a rare day away from cameras and expectations. It was the kind of scene that made royalty feel human. Charlotte in her riding boots, hair tied neatly, clutching a juice box, cheering for young riders with the same enthusiasm as any 9-year-old. But what no one saw coming was that this unassuming event, nestled in a field far from the scrutiny of Buckingham Palace, would soon become the epicenter of a quiet but seismic royal rift. At first, it all felt refreshingly normal. Prince William stood casually speaking with King Charles. Kate Middleton knelt by her children, pointing out horses in the ring. Even Camilla, Queen Consort, was seen mingling with locals in a warm coat and wool scarf. And among the extended family that day was Camilla's granddaughter, Lola Parker, not a royal by title, but often present at family events due to her close bond with Camilla. Her presence barely drew attention. Most observers assumed she was just another familiar face in the royal periphery. But behind the smiles and the polite exchanges, a quiet tension was simmering. Few noticed it in the moment. No one suspected that a passing comment, a minor slight between children, would soon spark an emotional fallout that would draw invisible battle lines between generations and even fracture the palace's carefully managed public image. This wasn't a day built for drama, and yet, somewhere between the show ring and the snack stand, something shifted, and once it did, nothing about that sunny horse show felt quite the same again. The moment itself was so subtle, so ordinary, it could have easily gone unnoticed. A simple exchange between 2 girls of similar age, both dressed for the countryside in their muddy boots and wind-swept hair. Princess Charlotte, daughter of Prince William and Kate Middleton, had just taken a sip from her juice box when she noticed Lola Parker, Camilla's granddaughter, watching her. Charlotte, raised with the kind of manners that come with both good parenting and royal expectation, turned to her and asked, "Do you want some?" It was the kind of gesture that would make any parent proud. Lola nodded and replied, "Yeah, sure." Charlotte smiled and handed it over, adding gently, "Just don't finish it. We're going to be here a long time and I'll need it later." There was no edge in her voice, no royal arrogance, just the kind of practical honesty you'd expect from a child who's learned to share without giving everything away. And with that, she turned back to the ring, clapping for a rider who had just cleared a jump. But when she looked back moments later, her juice box was empty, completely drained. Charlotte blinked in confusion. "Wait, did you finish it?" she asked. Lola looked at her, expression flat, and answered, "Yeah." Charlotte's face tightened. "But I told you not to. Why would you do that?" What came next was not a tantrum, not a childish shrug. It was a deliberate, carefully measured response that hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Lola looked at Charlotte and said with chilling calm, "You act like you're in charge of everything. Like you're the queen already. Just like your mum." The words landed like ice. Charlotte's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now. But Lola wasn't finished. "She's not even queen," she said, still measured, still sharp. "My grandma is. Your mum's just pretending. Everyone sees it." And then the final blow. "And you're not special. One day they'll just marry you off and that's it. That's all you'll ever be. Someone's wife." There was no yelling, no scene, just cold, precise words spoken softly enough not to draw attention, but heavy enough to leave a mark. Charlotte didn't cry immediately. She stood still for a moment, frozen, juice box crushed in her hand, and then she turned, walked straight to her mother, and held Kate's hand like it was the only safe thing left in the world. Witnesses said Kate's face changed instantly. The warmth drained. Her posture stiffened. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. She just pulled Charlotte close and knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her like a shield. Prince William, who had been chatting with King Charles just feet away, stopped mid-sentence as he caught sight of Charlotte's face. He walked over, jaw set, and after a brief exchange took his daughter by the hand and led her away. The horse show carried on, but the air had shifted. Something unspoken had passed between them all, and the ripple was only just beginning.
Just 24 hours after the event, what had begun as a quiet confrontation between children had transformed into something far more serious. By Monday morning, whispers were already circulating through the royal press corps. Something had happened at the horse show, something personal, but no one expected what came next. In an unprecedented move, Prince William took to Twitter. No official palace seal, no carefully worded press release vetted by advisors. Just a stark, direct message from his personal account that read, "My family will always come first. Anyone who thinks they can harm my daughter and remain close to us is mistaken." It was a line in the sand. No names were mentioned, but the timing was unmistakable. Royal watchers didn't need context. They already knew. The tweet hit the media like a thunderclap. Commentators scrambled. Analysts dissected every word. For a man known for his restraint, for his careful public demeanor, this was the equivalent of slamming a door in the face of the palace's usual silence. What followed was a media storm. Was William talking about Camilla, about Lola, about both? Debate raged in tabloids and television studios across the UK and beyond. More importantly, the tweet reopened old wounds, specifically those that had never fully healed around William's wife, Kate Middleton. As the press began digging into the family dynamic, they unearthed years of quiet hostility and thinly veiled attacks aimed at the Duchess of Cambridge. The scrutiny had started long before the pony show, from unfair tabloid narratives to whispers among palace aides. Critics had accused Kate of being too perfect, too reserved, too controlling of her children's lives. And now it seemed that criticism had spilled over to her daughter. What the tweet made clear was this: William had reached his breaking point. His message wasn't a public relations play. It was a warning shot, a father stepping out from behind royal protocol to defend his child, no matter the cost. While some insiders reportedly advised against the tweet, warning it could escalate tensions within the family, William overruled them. To him, this wasn't political, it was personal. And in that moment, he stopped being just the future king and became unmistakably a father unwilling to let anyone diminish the people he loved. Quietly, the palace communications team scrambled to handle the fallout, but it was too late. The public had seen something they weren't used to, a royal drawing a hard line, and once drawn, that line couldn't be erased. For more than a decade, the Duchess of Cambridge has been both celebrated and dissected by the media with an intensity matched by few others in public life. In photographs, she's always polished, poised in tailored coats, smiling gently beside her children, her hand often resting lightly on Charlotte's back. But beneath the surface, Kate Middleton has weathered relentless criticism. Royal insiders quietly admit that no matter how graciously she carries herself in public, behind closed doors, she's often forced to endure attacks she never responds to. The harsh spotlight isn't new. Years ago, before she officially became part of the monarchy, her private holiday photos with her sister Pippa were taken with long lenses splashed across tabloids without consent. That invasion, one of the earliest, set the tone for what was to come. Despite her silence, the headlines never stopped. She's been called too perfect, too robotic, and even too distant. Week after week, the narrative shifted. In one moment, she was reportedly feuding with Meghan Markle. The next, she was accused of hiding behind a carefully cultivated image. Critics nitpicked her parenting, claiming she was too strict, that she sheltered the children too much, limited their screen time, raised them too privately. One article even claimed the royal children didn't have real friends, as if the protection of one's children was a flaw. Through it all, Kate never lashed out. She didn't give interviews to defend herself. She didn't make Instagram posts clarifying her position. She simply showed up, walked into hospitals, read to children, sat with grieving families, but the weight was always there, unspoken. And now with the incident at the horse show, the criticism had crossed a new and deeply personal line. A 9-year-old girl, her daughter, had been humiliated in front of strangers, For Kate, it wasn't just about one cruel remark. It was the culmination of years of being treated like an outsider, even as she upheld every royal expectation. That day, when Charlotte ran to her and gripped her hand, the look on Kate's face said everything. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and stood firm, her spine straight, her expression frozen. It was a moment that said, without words, that the quiet dignity she had carried all these years now had boundaries, and anyone, family or not, who crossed those boundaries would no longer be given grace without consequence. The incident may have started with Charlotte, but it had reopened old wounds for her mother, and this time it would not be ignored. Inside palace walls, where decisions are often made with whispers instead of declarations, something unspoken had shifted. In the days following the horse show, there was no official statement from Kensington Palace. No public apology was issued, but those who know how the monarchy operates saw the signs instantly. Camilla's granddaughter, Lola Parker, the girl at the center of the incident with Princess Charlotte, was no longer on the guest list for upcoming royal events. Her name simply disappeared. It didn't take long for reporters to notice. She was absent from the Spring Garden celebration at Windsor, quietly missing from Camilla's side during a high-profile charity appearance. The optics were clear, even if the message was never verbalized. William had acted, and his decision was final. This wasn't a dramatic punishment, at least not outwardly. There were no public scoldings, no scenes of confrontation, but the exclusion spoke volumes. For someone who had grown up near the edges of royal privilege, always present yet never fully inside the circle, Lola's removal wasn't just disciplinary, it was symbolic. Her access, her presence, her quiet proximity to power had been revoked. Whatever private passes she once had were now void. The inner sanctum of the royal family, famously insular, had quietly closed the door, and William, with the precision of someone who's watched protocol his entire life, made sure the door stayed shut. To the public, this was more than just a family decision. It was a message about where the boundaries now lay. No matter how close you stood to the throne, you couldn't use that proximity as a weapon. You couldn't wound the next generation and still expect to sit at the family table. The action was decisive and, more importantly, personal. It wasn't driven by scandal management or media pressure. It was a father protecting his daughter in the only way that truly mattered, by redrawing the lines around her. What surprised many wasn't that William acted, but how quietly he did so. No grandstanding, no revenge narrative, just the cold efficiency of someone who'd had enough. Royal insiders admitted privately that this kind of removal is rare, almost unheard of, unless serious wrongdoing is involved. But in William's eyes, the real transgression wasn't just a comment at a horse show, it was the assumption that someone on the fringe could strike the core of his family without consequence. And with that, Lola's unspoken privilege ended, not with a bang, but with silence. The kind of silence that only royalty can wield so effectively. Camilla, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, has spent 2 decades navigating the delicate terrain of royal life, rebuilding her image, shaping her role, and proving time and again that she belonged. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The moment she learned that her granddaughter, Lola Parker, had been quietly removed from royal gatherings, she didn't respond with royal detachment or diplomatic restraint. According to sources close to Clarence House, Camilla was livid. She paced her quarters, slammed doors, and repeated the same sentence like a mantra: "They've crossed a line." For her, this wasn't about a child's mistake. It was about legacy, about everything she had fought for since becoming part of the royal fold, about respect, not just for Lola, but for herself. The sting came not just from the ban, but from how it was handled. She hadn't been consulted. There was no conversation, no warning. And when she turned to King Charles, pleading for the decision to be reconsidered, his response was icy. Barely looking up from his reading, he muttered, "It's been handled." That was it. No explanation, no sympathy. Just a quiet finality that crushed any hope she had of softening the outcome. For Camilla, who had spent years attending garden parties, smiling at school visits, and showing up to charity galas in the hope of winning over both the public and the palace, it felt like betrayal, not just by William, but by the system she had tried so hard to join. She wasn't just being sidelined, she was being reminded in the cruelest of ways that her family would always be seen as outsiders. Her anger quickly turned inward, landing not just on the decision itself, but put on Kate. In private, she voiced sharp accusations that the Duchess had used the moment to cement her own image, to reinforce her position as the untouchable mother, the composed wife, the silent victim. She's not innocent. Camilla reportedly told close confidants, she knows what she's doing. She always has. Smiles in public, knives in private. But her frustration found little traction. Kate hadn't said a word, hadn't leaked a thing. And when the cameras next caught her, she was at a children's hospital, calm and focused, with Charlotte beside her. There were no press statements, no tweets, just a gentle hand on her daughter's back. A quiet show of unity that said more than any defense ever could. In the palace halls, Camilla's fury echoed, but fewer were listening. She began calling private meetings, speaking with senior aides, hoping to build a coalition of support. But the usual allies were hesitant. The soft power she had cultivated, the quiet influence once whispered about in royal circles, was beginning to evaporate. Her words landed with less weight. Her appeals met polite nods, but no promises. Even Charles, once her staunchest ally, had grown silent. Camilla had expected resistance, but not this wall of indifference. For the first time in years, the queen consort found herself not just outmaneuvered, but out of place. A figure standing in the center of power, yet suddenly unable to move it. When doors inside the palace started closing, Camilla turned to the one arena where influence could still be exercised, the press. Over the following weeks, headlines began to shift. At first, they appeared harmless, soft features in long-established outlets like Hello Magazine and The Telegraph that framed Lola as a bright, misunderstood young girl caught in a grown-up rift. The tone was subtle, but the narrative was clear. These weren't spontaneous articles, they were placed, quietly sourced, strategically worded, designed to recast the horse show incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding, one where the response, not the offense, had gone too far. Camilla wasn't just reacting, she was fighting back, the way the monarchy has done for centuries. Not with swords, but with stories. But the tone didn't stay soft for long. In the weeks that followed, certain tabloids escalated. Some articles began hinting at tensions between the Waleses and Camilla. Others speculated about a growing rift within the royal family's core. There were carefully planted phrases like a minor disagreement blown out of proportion, and quotes from anonymous palace insiders suggesting that Lola had been unfairly punished for an awkward moment. The subtext was deliberate. This wasn't about defending a child anymore. It was about protecting Camilla's legacy, about reshaping public perception before the image of Charlotte's tearful face, crushed juice box in hand, became a symbol too difficult to erase. Through it all, Prince William remained silent. He refused interviews, declined to issue follow-up statements. His aides were instructed not to engage, no matter how pointed the press coverage became. It was a gamble. In the royal playbook, silence can either protect or backfire. But William wasn't playing for optics. He was playing for peace, at least at first. Insiders now say that the pressure inside Kensington Palace was mounting. Every tabloid line defending Lola only deepened the wedge. The queen consort was using her old press channels to sway opinion, and the more she pushed, the more William's team dug in. The strategy was clear. Enter the storm. Let the facts and the public decide. But outside the palace gates, the public had already spoken. Social media erupted with a wave of support for Charlotte and her parents. Hashtags like Team Charlotte, on Kate Strong, and William Did Right trended for days. Even users typically disengaged from royal drama chimed in. She's 9. You don't come for a child, one tweet read. Others questioned why Lola had that level of access in the first place. It wasn't just support, it was outrage, directed at the very idea that a child could be targeted and then defended with palace spin. Still, Camilla didn't back down. The longer she pressed her narrative, the more clear it became. This wasn't just about the incident, it was about her position and her fear that it was beginning to slip. Behind the scenes, she was relentless. She pushed her advisors, leaned on sympathetic journalists, and continued to lobby for Lola's return to royal events. But every effort landed softer than the last. The same doors that once opened at her call were now barely cracked. The monarchy she had fought so hard to be accepted by was showing her just how conditional that acceptance truly was. The palace had always functioned on quiet control. Silent nods, subtle reshuffling, unspoken understandings. But behind the marble walls of Kensington, the tension had grown unbearable. For weeks, Prince William had endured the pressure without flinching. He watched as Camilla's preferred media outlets tried to reshape the narrative. He read headlines portraying his daughter's hurt as overreaction. He remained still as whispers suggested that banning a child from royal events was too harsh. But the quiet was not a sign of weakness. It was the kind of silence that precedes something irreversible. irreversible. According to 2 senior aides, the breaking point came not in a moment of confrontation, but in a meeting about something far more serious: the king's health. That meeting, held in a private drawing room at Clarence's house, was meant to address Charles's ongoing treatments. Behind closed doors, concerns were growing. The monarch's strength was fluctuating, and recovery was proving slower than hoped. But for William, the meeting offered clarity. Not about medicine, but about the monarchy's future. With the crown's inevitable transfer creeping closer, William made a decision that stunned even his closest advisors. Calmly and without theatricality, he stated that when his time came to lead, Camilla would have no role in the institution's future. "She replaced my mother once," he said quietly, "but she won't replace her in memory." The words landed like thunder in the room. There was no argument, no further clarification needed. Everyone knew what he meant. Diana's legacy, once complicated by Camilla's presence, was being restored. Not with ceremony, but with conviction. William's vision of the monarchy would not include blurred loyalties or half measures. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was legacy management, a resetting of values. In his mind, the line between family and institution had become dangerously porous, and now that line would be redrawn, sharply. But it didn't end with palace strategy. A few days later, in a quieter room, William sat down with his 3 children. There were no titles, no thrones, just a father and his young heirs. And in that space, away from the press and the staff and the noise, he told them the truth. Camilla was no longer to be seen as their grandmother. "She doesn't act like one," he said plainly. "She doesn't deserve the name." Instead, he gave them something else: clarity. "You already have a grandmother," he told them, "and her name is Diana." It was a moment of healing, but also of reckoning, not just for Charlotte, who had been the center of the storm, but for a family whose story had long been tangled in public confusion and private grief. For William, this wasn't revenge, and it was correction. The royal record would be set, even if it happened behind closed doors. Camilla's presence would remain in title, yes, but in the photos hung in the next generation's halls, in the bedtime stories told to royal children, and in the legacy passed on, she would be absent. What followed Prince William's private declarations was not a public spectacle, but a quiet restructuring, a redefinition of roles, symbols, and stories within the royal family. There were no press conferences, no grand announcements, but palace insiders began to notice the shift. Camilla's photos were discreetly pulled from select future exhibits. Mentions of her in briefing documents became less frequent, and in family gatherings, aides observed a noticeable distance between her and the younger royals. It was the beginning of what some within palace walls began to call the invisible removal. Camilla would retain her official title, Queen Consort, but behind the scenes, her presence in the royal narrative was fading. For the Wales children, the change came in gentler ways. Bedtime stories now spoke more openly about Diana, not as a distant figure, but as their real grandmother. Her legacy, once delicately tiptoed around, was now embraced with clarity. Portraits of her that once hung in quieter corners of Kensington Palace began to be placed more prominently. Charlotte, in particular, was told stories about Diana's strength, her compassion, her boldness, qualities that, by many accounts, she was already beginning to reflect. To the children, the message was simple: there is no vacancy to be filled. The space where a grandmother's love should be was already occupied and always had been. For William, the rewriting of family memory wasn't about erasure, it was about restoration. Diana had long been positioned in public memory as the people's princess, but within the walls of the institution she once challenged, her influence had been overshadowed. William made sure that wouldn't happen again, not under his watch, and not in his household. In subtle ways, decisions reflected that. Invitations to royal events began to change. Camilla was included where protocol demanded, but there were fewer side-by-side appearances with the Wales family, fewer joint engagements, and perhaps most telling of all, discussions about the future monarchy began to exclude her name when speaking of ceremonial legacy. This wasn't punishment, it was clarity. The crown, after years of navigating compromise, had found its internal compass again, at least in William's corner of it. Royal historians took note. Constitutional scholars speculated that a precedent was quietly being set, that legacy within the royal family was no longer about bloodlines or alliances, but about values. And in the Wales household, those values now had clear boundaries: protecting children, honoring truth, and refusing to let anyone, no matter how close to the throne, rewrite the emotional hierarchy of the family. While Camilla remained remained in the picture publicly, those closest to the family understood the truth. She might sit beside the king, might wear the title, might attend the ceremonies, but in the photographs that mattered, the ones that would line the walls of future palaces, the ones etched in memory, her place was no longer secure. That space had been quietly reclaimed, and this time, for good. In the end, what began as a hushed dispute between two children at a horse show evolved into a turning point for Britain's most carefully choreographed family. Prince William didn't raise his voice. He didn't court media attention or retaliate with grand gestures. Instead, he did something far more lasting. He drew a line, one that separated the performative unity of the monarchy from the private truths it had long ignored. That line wasn't just about protecting his daughter from humiliation, it was about defining the future of the crown in terms that felt more human, more personal, and less beholden to the compromises of the past. In doing so, William reasserted something the monarchy had quietly lost: the power to control its emotional narrative. Legacy, in royal terms, is usually measured in titles and succession, but William chose to measure it through loyalty. Loyalty to his late mother, Diana, who spent her life struggling against the system's cold machinery. Loyalty to his wife, Kate, who had endured years of polite cruelty without ever breaking decorum. And most of all, loyalty to his children, especially Charlotte, who had become an unwitting symbol of what was at stake. He didn't just shield her from a one-time insult, he shielded her from a culture of quiet degradation that had, for too long, been permitted under the guise of tradition. This wasn't about vengeance. William didn't seek to humiliate Camilla publicly. He didn't revoke her titles or undermine her role beside the king. But he did make something unmistakably clear. In the monarchy of tomorrow, presence is not the same as belonging. You may stand beside the throne, but if your actions fracture the family's emotional trust, you stand alone. Camilla may continue her duties, appear in the processionals, smile for the cameras, but in William's kingdom, the one he will one day inherit, she will be a ceremonial figure, not a maternal one. Her legacy, once hopeful, is now unofficially sealed, and the monarchy, for all its centuries of stoic ritual, has taken note. William's quiet but forceful choices have begun to redefine the tone at the very top. No longer will emotional injuries be brushed aside as minor breaches of protocol. No longer will royal children be exposed to palace politics without protection. The next generation, under his guidance, will grow up with firmer boundaries and clearer expectations of what family, not just royalty, should look like. When history looks back, it might not remember the juice box or the pony show, but it will remember what followed. A future king standing between his daughter and a crown that has sometimes failed to protect its own. Not with ceremony, not with decree, but with action. William didn't just draw a line, he showed what kind of man he intends to be when the crown is his. And in doing so, he reminded the world that even in the most powerful families, loyalty still matters, perhaps more than ever.